Meet me at the Musial with Alan and Daniel. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. Everyone come gather round, listen to your favorite sound. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We'll talk the games and all the rest, about the team that we love best. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
Good morning and welcome into another edition of Meet Me at Musial. I'm your host and your shop at C70. With me as always, Alan Medlock, a Medlock1 over on the Twitters, coming to you Saturday morning after the Cardinals basically lost a game they shouldn't have lost. I think that's really what it boils down to, Alan. You've got, I think it was they got out 5-2 lead, had a lead pretty much most of the night, and you've got Sonny Gray on the mound against the Nationals team that's not particularly good, although obviously has its high points. It was just a combination that they shouldn't have lost, and then they wind up losing it. It's a frustrating game all the way around. But what were you thinking about it?
Yeah, the same thing. Friday start the season. You get the day. I mean, you had the early game on Wednesday. You have the Thursday off day. You feel refreshed. Get back. Ace on the mound. Those are ones that you got to chalk up, especially on an important homestand. You know, as you have a team right on your heels now. You get gifted with a Milwaukee loss. You know, all those things were huge in the fact that you thought, hey, this will be one they win, but to let it slip away is pretty difficult. You know, you got to walk away from this homestand 4-2, I would believe. Losing the first one makes that difficult. But yeah, it was one of those kind of a gut punch deal, and nothing seemed to be going right. I don't believe they had a hit after it was either the fifth or sixth inning last night as well. I mean, they pat the bullpen on their bullpen on the back, I guess, but that plays a huge part, leaving guys on base and all that stuff. But yeah, as we get closer to the deadline, and they've played themselves into this situation. Last night was one you had to win, and that's what letting it slip through hurts even worse.
Yeah. I mean, they did have one hit because they had the Goldschmidt homer in the 10th, but by that time the damage was
Yeah. I
done.
forgot about the extra inning homer.
Yeah, and I mean it didn't. I mean that cut into the deficit, but you still was one of those kind of things that you knew wasn't going to lead to a rally or anything like that. It was just kind of oh well, that's nice. And I mean it was a game where Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt homered in the same game, and that's probably the first time this year, isn't it? I mean, I haven't looked it up, and there may have been some reference in game stories, but if it's not the first, it's one of the very rare times this year where they both have homered, and then you still lose.
Yeah. That's a great point. I had not. It's still weird to me that they've had the seasons that they've had, and I mean, here we are into August, and it's just I don't know. It feels like, hey, they're close, but I've grown way less confident in that.
Well, sure. I will say, Nolan's hit a home run in the last 3 series. I think he seems to be, I wouldn't say back to Nolan, but more productive. Goldie still seems to be, man, it's to the point where you wonder if Paul Goldschmidt decides to retire at the end of the year. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there's on one side, it's like, okay, he doesn't want to go out like that. But on the other side, it's like, is this it? Is this age and everything catching up to him? Because he's had a few spurts here and there, but he's not had anything that makes you think that, this is the Goldschmidt we've seen before.
Yeah, that's something I hadn't considered. That's probably a good point. Honestly, it's strange. Back to the Arenado deal. I felt like you've seen an uptick in his offense, which has also helped the defense too. I mean, I didn't feel like he was the defender that he had been, historically early in the season, but now I feel like he's playing extremely well. So I think that may be a good sign. Yeah, I honestly I had not thought about that, but yeah, I'm sure the frustrations are there.
Mm-hmm. I think with Nolan, as you said, sometimes he's got to either have some good success, so whatever it takes to get out of his own head, right? And once he
No.
does that, once he can play, I think, yeah, like you said, both sides of his game, the offense and the defense, pick up. Um, and I think to some degree with the defense, I've always thought Nolan takes some time to get adjusted to stuff. I mean, we've seen some, like the first year he was over here, he struggled defensively till the second half, and I think that was just getting used to playing Busch Stadium. When they took away the shift that first year, that first half he was weaker. And I think playing again with Mason Wynn, a guy that can cover so much ground this year, took him a while to adjust to how he wanted to play. And hopefully now that he has kind of adjusted. And like you said, and he may be also one where if he can get the defense under control, then he can focus on the offense and has the confidence and gets going. I don't know. I just know that it has had that uptick, and it's been a really nice thing to see.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah, that's what adds to the frustration with well, I guess it's always the frustration while we're doing the show, but I mean it's one of those things to where you just hear how abysmal they are against left-handed pitching, and I feel like everybody sees that, but like it's unfortunately it's what they are now. I mean, if those two aren't going to hit, I mean, to be where they are is right now is really surprising considering what under expectations of those two are, so
Mhm.
yeah, but I mean, I feel like they're going to be contributors down the stretch. I think the Cardinals are still a good team. I worry about Pittsburgh a little bit just because they have the arms, but I still think they've put themselves in a really good chance to move forward. But I mean, if you want to circle a team that is in that needs that needs that fortification from someone outside the
Mhm.
organization and show that, hey, we're going for this. It's the Cardinals right now. I think they're the perfect example. They played their way into contention this year. There's some holes. There's guys out there. I understand trades are tough, but this is one of those that the clubhouse probably needs a kick in the pants and to show that the organization's there to help. And I'm not so certain that they do anything. And I'm not speaking out of frustration.
Mhm.
I'm just not so certain that there's going to be a right fit out there. Like if honestly, my top three that I wanted were Eflin, who's gone, of course,
Right.
Fairbanks, and Pham, and I don't. The other two don't seem to fit. Fairbanks doesn't seem like he's going to move, and then Pham doesn't seem like he would come back.
Right.
So I'm not sure what's out there. You'd hear a lot of things, but to me, the Cardinals are the perfect example of a team that could really take off if they could just get one move.
Well, and that's interesting because I was going into this show wondering, and I'm going to ask you if they had actually peaked too early. And part of that is we saw them. Again, they had the best record at least for a while from Mother's Day till what, July maybe, into June. They had a good stretch where they had one of the better records in baseball. Um, but the schedule's going to get tougher. They have had a weaker schedule, and they at one time, they're fighting for that first wild card spot. Now they're a game and a half out of the wild card. They haven't been able to make up ground on Milwaukee. Um, it just worries me a little bit that they hit they hit their stride a little too early, and now the league is adjusting to them to some degree, and maybe not, but to watch them over the last few days. Again, losing 2 out of 3 to Pittsburgh, a tough series, but and it's not. There's no shame in losing to Pittsburgh the way like it would have been like 2 or 3 years ago, right?
Sure.
But it's still that's a series you got to win, especially when you take the Paul Skeens game, and then to lose this game and then just to continually fall in the standings because I mean the wild cards we've talked about a long time. Everybody's right there.
Yeah.
I do worry a little bit that they've hit their high point and they're not going to be able to get that bounce. But like you said, maybe getting another arm or bat or whatever the case may be gives them a little bit of a push, even with the schedule getting tougher.
Sure. Well, that's a great point as well. I mean, I don't feel like you go through a 2 month stretch of playing very well though, just to say, hey, this is what we are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I do think that they played above. They played a lot better than their record is better than the way they played. I hope that makes
Right.
sense. Just like you and I were talking about it. They never move their run differential at all. I
Right.
mean, very, very limited. And maybe that is the team that they are. But I think that they didn't go into this thinking that the two cornerstones would play as poorly as they have either. I feel like that you've lucked out being in the draw where you are right now, and you got to take advantage of it. But you and I both knowing this and being through a ton of trade deadlines together, it wouldn't surprise me if they held pat and even made the comments about the guys that are coming, which is is frustrating.
Sure. Yeah, you talk about run differential, and I know a couple of shows ago we were talking about how it was kind of sticking around 38, and last week they'd moved it to negative 31. Well, it's back
Yeah,
to negative 38 now.
yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean, they just
it
can't
just
shake it.
and that being that they stick around that point, you do wonder if that's the kind of team that they are. Yeah, their expected win loss, especially from the run differential, is 47 and 56. So they're about 6 games better than that. And you start to, I mean, just for me, you start thinking, are those numbers going to kind of start to combine? The 3 games
Yeah.
over 500 now. Um, are they going to be able to, get another kick, or are they going to, kind of start into that and just kind of hang around 500 the rest of the way? And I don't know. I mean, I think there's cases for both, just because, like I said, they made some hay against some weaker teams. They didn't, just dominate, but they did pretty well. But that schedule, we've looked at that August schedule before, and that's harder. I agree that there is a non-zero chance the Cardinals don't do anything. You and I, we messaged this week when James Paxton was DFA'd by the Dodgers, and that felt like a move that the Cardinals would try to make. And maybe they didn't get a chance to, because we saw the Red Sox traded for him,
Yeah,
and they may
and
not
there's
have gotten.
familiarity there.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
that move makes sense. But I know where you're going with this, and I agree with you.
Well, and I can't remember exactly how the waiver situation works, but I don't know that he completely cleared waivers that way. And so I don't think he did. And so the Red Sox may have had priority over the Cardinals anyway. So it may not have gotten to them. But yeah, it is, it felt like that might have been a move they made, but it didn't get made. You're right. Eflin was a guy that the Cardinals had been tied to. He's already moved. And it you start looking at what's reasonable out there, um, for the Cardinals, and then you start wondering, how much good does it do, right? Is it just a situation where you hope that, Tommy Edman and Steven Matz, and, you know, they figure out a way to maybe, get Ivan Herrera up here, and I haven't seen what he's done at Memphis since he went down, but, and Jordan Walker hit a home run, does he start to finally come around? That's a lot of ifs and ands, but, is that the way they go? It's definitely not a situation where they're going to mortgage the future. Um, and not that there ever has been a situation where they mortgage the future. I can't think of one, but we're sitting on, I think it was 13 years ago today, the Colby Rasmus trade. We're a long way from that. It's, we're just, those aren't the kind of things that Mo does in mid-season, and I don't think that's a trade, one, the Cardinals could do, and two, you wonder how much good would it do. I guess, if you got 4 pieces like you did with the Coleman Rasmus trade, it would make sense, but there's not a piece that the Cardinals can give up that would get that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's it was. I do. Gosh, 13 years ago sounds crazy,
Hmm.
but I do wonder about like whenever I heard Eric Fetty's name brought up,
Yeah,
that one would make sense because he's the +1. He's got
sure.
one more year of control
Right.
after this,
Hmm.
and they have so many guys on those expiring 1-year deals with the options. And I was like, well, that's an easy, relatively cheap fit that would work for them because you could go, you can push it in next year, because I think that you're in a situation where you have to have 6 starters. At this point, that's kind of what happened to him in the bullpen game. Now, of course, they didn't hit a lefty on the
Right.
getaway day in
Right.
Pittsburgh, because to me, you win the Skeens game, you feel pretty darn good. You go out and win the next one, you feel really good. You win those
Hmm.
back-to-back series after not playing very well. Well, then things kind of change. But then you lay that egg the next day, and the offense looks terrible in the bullpen game. You're like, well, we're not really sure what they are. Offensively, we probably know what they are. Maybe in the rotation, you probably need that sixth guy. What I worry about is, well, I don't know, wouldn't necessarily say worry about, but I feel like Palante's done enough to where they feel like they have five steady now. And that concerns me a little bit because I kind of thought that they would have to go and get another guy regardless. That's where I think you're a Fetty, which makes sense to come in and be an additional guy to have a year of control next year. I think they're probably apprehensive to move anybody on that because I think they may like what they have and think they're pretty confident in what's coming, which kind of points toward the future more than it does this year anyway.
Yeah.
It's kind of a safety blanket. Like me personally, I feel like you would almost have to have that sixth, and then it turns into, can you move Carlson plus somebody to get a bat that's going to help? I mean, that's I feel like that's I feel like they've painted themselves into that corner. So I don't know. I hope something comes out that's highly creative to help them in both fashion. I mean, you're not going to go get the crochet, and it's one of those where I kind of hope they don't, just because he's at his innings limit. I don't know how much he's going to pitch. The rest of the year. And then I was listening to Rosenthal the other day, and he wants he wants extension talk before he goes. I'm like, man, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces to go into something like that, where I didn't think the Cardinals were in on him anyway. But yeah, I mean, you're starting to lose a lot of those second tier guys now that would probably be in the wheelhouse for the Cardinals, and I think they could very easily talk themselves out of making any moves at this point, which I just don't think is fair to the ball club.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and there's enough need there that because it does feel like they could use another arm. Jojo Romero's kind of sliding, and maybe maybe he'll rebound or whatever the case may be. But you could use another arm in the bullpen. You always use another arm in the bullpen, right? I mean, that just goes without saying to some degree. And even if they did bring in some sort of right-handed bat, but again, I start to get to wonder, how does that fit on this roster? And I think you're right. I think if they trade for a hitter, especially, I think Carlson is gone. Rough ending for him last night. Just completely missed the ball out in the outfield that led to the 3 runs in the 10th. And, obviously the player has to take some blame for that, but he's playing in a spot where he doesn't usually play, and he's playing. I mean, I almost forgot. I don't know when the last time he played was, right? I mean, definitely I don't remember the last time he was in the starting lineup. It just kind of feels like his time in St. Louis is done, which is sad to say. And hopefully, he goes and is successful somewhere else. But I gotta admit, I just feel like it just kind of has that feeling like he's not going to be around after the trade deadline.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. And it's for Carlson's sake, when he went on that little bit of run, I was thinking, okay, now this starts to work out a little bit. But yeah, I think he's lost all favor. Probably played more than I have expected him to. But they really like Siani, what he brings right now in the outfield, especially considering that they don't score many runs. And the Edmund situation is so weird, but I do feel like that's going to be a move regardless of how much it helps the team this year or next year. But I feel like that's probably the one that the move that's probably obvious to be made.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're going to have to make some room for Tommy Edman somewhere anyway. And I think there's a fair thing to do would be to cut Brendan Crawford, because he's not going to play. He's really not going to play with Tommy Edman on the roster,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there's really no need for him. But it's also the Cardinals, and you never know if they're going to do something like that or not. But yeah, I feel like Carlson's whatever value he has, and I'm sure there's some value out there, although a team's going to buy low on him, even if they're excited about him.
Sure.
But yeah, him and who knows what else. I think that I got to think that Mo's focus at this trade deadline, I mean, he still is looking at the same pieces. He's looking at the same, but his willingness to spend has changed over the last few days, right? I mean, from from going from 1 or 2 games comfortably into the wild card to 1.5 games out. I think it just has to change his perspective some. I mean, not that he doesn't still want to help this team, and not that he's not going to do something, but it becomes harder to pull the trigger on some sort of significant move when it's hard to know if you're going to get any postseason reward out of it.
Sure. Yeah. I understand. I mean, it's
Mhm.
they which we've had this conversation for the last 4 or 5 years about the
Sure.
roster of where it's they've kind of boxed themselves in, so to speak, and
Mhm.
it's tough. I mean, it's tough. I mean, it's to me after coming off of last year, I feel like you owe it to the roster to upgrade to upgrade and do something.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
not being in the clubhouse, not knowing not knowing the how not knowing how that shakes out. I don't know if losing to Carlson at this point it hurts. Well, I mean,
Mhm.
we know it won't in the lineup per se, and one of those things. But you also don't know what kind of a shakeup you have in there. So it's one of those fly on the wall type situations. But there's a lot of signs to point that time is up, and they need to improve. And I think that you've outperformed where you thought you were going to be, considering that your two best players have not been very good.
Yeah.
All that being said, I mean, I think that I would not be surprised if Wednesday morning we're texting each other like, "Well, man, they got them for this, and the Cardinals did nothing." I almost expect it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm interested to see what happens, but I can't say that I'm holding my breath on anything.
Yeah.
Which is typical Cardinal trade deadline, right? I
Sure.
mean, there have been years at least we could talk ourselves into, okay, we don't really believe that they're going to make this trade, but it would make sense for them to make this the one Soto, if nothing else, right? We didn't necessarily expect them to, and I think we were surprised at how close they actually did come to making that trade. But you could talk yourself into that. I don't know that there's anything like that out there this year, right? I mean, there are pieces and part. I mean, a few weeks ago when it looked like Texas might sell and the Max Scherzer thing, okay, that maybe that was that, but they're not selling now. They're in much more of a race than almost as much of a race, more of a race than the Cardinals are. I mean, they've got they're 2.5. I think I
Yeah.
looked last time out of the division. So, um, I just don't. I mean, I think there's things that the Cardinals can do, but I don't think there's things out there that there's not that big deal that makes a lot of sense and makes or and would generate some excitement. You're getting I think the best thing, I mean, you're probably right on the biggest thing they could do is the Fetty trade. And that's I mean, that would help, there's no doubt, and having him for next year is great, but that's not necessarily one of those just, you know, overwhelmingly exciting deals.
Sure, you could have signed him. Could have
Right.
signed him
Right.
last offseason. The I understand performance. Yeah, it kind of trumps that, but yeah, you're right. I mean, and think about it. I mean, this is one of those. The whole time you were talking just then, I was trying to think. Well, the teams that we know are moving guys are Tampa and Chicago. And
Mhm.
that's the ones that we know as a definitive. There's a lot of rumblings around the Blue Jays, and they have some ancillary pieces to do, but they're not going to. I don't expect them to trade Bichette or Guerrero.
No, no.
The and that's one of those to where Bassett's a big name, and
Right.
they have a bunch of pieces to move, but like as far as definitive sellers, I mean those are the two that stand out. I mean early in the season everybody was like, well, it could be New York. Well, the Mets have played extremely well.
Mhm.
Put themselves into a good situation. So I'm not sure what kind of market there is out there for anything right now, as close as anybody is, and that will be the excuse for a lot of teams not making any moves. Period.
Well, and then some of the teams that are at least thinking about moves are the Reds and the Cubs, right? And they're in the same division. That brings a
Yeah,
whole nother wrinkle into
sure.
this. Do you want to send a guy to them? Are they going to want to send a guy to you? Even if you do match up, which I don't know that they would. That did see the Blue Jays trade Garcia yesterday, which was another guy I think the Cardinals have been at least somewhat tied to.
Yeah.
I think if they could get and there is a connection of Cardinals in Toronto, right? I mean, going all the way back
Yes.
to Scott Rowland. I mean, there's been
Yeah.
numerous trades over the last decade plus up there, but if they could get a Bassett, I think that might be the that might be the biggest realistic possibility for the Cardinals, and I don't know necessarily how realistic it is, just because of the number of teams that would be bidding there. But that feels like a name that they might be able to get, but probably going to be a stretch to get him.
Yeah, I mean and it sounds like now there's probably some gamesmanship going on with this, but
Mm-hmm.
there are um Atkins has come out and said that they're going to keep all these guys, to prepare for next year. But there's always positioning that goes into
Right,
those
right.
things, so you never know. And I was looking, I was trying to think of just because it's the low hanging fruit where of where could see I could see a Carlson performing well in a Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
Assuming that would be the move. So, that it'd be more of the taking on the money situation with Bassett, but yeah,
Yeah,
you're right. I mean, that would be a big one, and that's a guy that's definitely going to take the ball in the rotation. So,
yeah, yeah,
another one of those situations where it's easy to draw the line between the two of them, which in me being the skeptic on those means it's less likely to happen.
yeah. Bassett is 21 million this year, so whatever that, whatever
Yeah,
basically 30% of that is. And then 21 million next year. So yeah, that does put a damper on things, although, you know, you're going to lose at least feels like you're going to lose at least Lance Lynn, right? I can see them picking up the option on Gibson. I don't know that they picked the option up on Lynn. And, Paul Goldschmidt isn't going to be here. I mean, there's going to be some money, and that
yeah,
doesn't necessarily, even getting a Bassett doesn't necessarily mean that you're out of the free agent market. You just have to kind of be careful of what you do, I guess. But, and that's assuming they don't get anything from Toronto. But again, I feel like you're right. That's taking two or three pieces, and I don't know. I don't know what how Cardinals minor leagues are valued. I can't think of any other major leaguer that's going except for, well, I guess if you count Navon Herrera, you could talk yourself into seeing him go. Him and Carlson are about the only things that have been or will be on the major league roster that could be dealt. I think, right? I mean, I don't. Is there? They're just not going to do anything like a Gorman trade or anything like that. And not saying they should, but I'm just just thinking about pieces that people might want. Um, I just don't think there's anything else out there.
yeah, yeah. That's You're right. You're right. I mean, that's yeah, not so much of what they can move and bring in, but financial flexibility. I think that you and I both always talk about that, where they have it much more than they ever admit to having it.
Yeah.
But yeah, player flexibility. I mean, it depends on yeah, the Goldschmidt leaving, and I think that you and I are both in agreement that that's probably going to happen. Adds another avenue for your Burleson, your Gorman, and those guys, which makes it more important to keep them. Because I'm assuming that's probably what some of the holdup is right now. If they're truly shopping these guys, is I'm sure Gorman's one of the first names that gets brought up in
Sure.
any of these moves, and that I would be surprised to see that happen.
I think any kind of Gorman trade, if there ever was going to happen, and again, Cardinals would be very, very hesitant to do it. But I think any kind of trade like that happens in the offseason,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
where
yeah,
you can get something bigger back and have it for all you. Because you know, if you were one piece away from a World Series, then you start thinking about things like that. But they're obviously not that, right? I mean, you're just hoping they can get to the playoffs, and it doesn't.
yeah,
And then, I mean, you got to get to the playoffs. You got to do something. And when you get to the playoffs, you kind of need an ace. But as of the last probably month, I don't know. The Cardinals have one, right? Sonny Gray has pitched. I don't think there's any word other than bad over his last
yeah,
five starts. He's got a 6.67 ERA. He's given up 5 home runs. He's only walked 5 guys in 28 innings, and struck out 35. So the strikeout and walks are there, but everything else I mean, 39 hits. Um, it's just it is his FIP over that period is 360, which is better. It's still not necessarily what you expect out of Sonny Gray at his best. Um, but batters are just crushing him. He's
Yeah.
given up an OPS of 928 over the last 5 starts, and so I get that, you get those little down spurts at times, although Gray's had a few of those this year. A couple of, he had a stretch back in May. There's only a couple starts where he had back-to-back starts where he gave up 5. Um, he gave an interview last night after the game, the one in the clubhouse, and it was a little bit odd, I guess, maybe the best thing to say. He kinda kept reiterating that he knew what he needed to do, and he was gonna start doing it, starting tomorrow. And the reporters couldn't get much more out of him than that. They didn't get any kind of specifics. Um, but it just sounded like a little bit like I don't know if he's lost focus. I don't know if the long season he's cut some corners. I don't know what the deal is, but it's been a little distressing to see, as the Cardinals are trying to make this push, their best pitcher has been continually lit up.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It was really cryptic and weird, and just, I don't know. Those interviews are so terrible. You know what I mean? A lot of times
Well, yeah.
enlightening, but then you're like, well, why don't you just say it?
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know,
It's,
after a tough
yeah.
loss, there's not much you expect him to
No,
say, but,
no. Yeah.
just to keep reiterating, I know what I need to do. I mean, I get you're not trying to, it's not, if it's something like I need to, grip my curveball this way instead. You're not
Yeah.
doing,
Yeah.
you're not talking about that but if it's hey, I just need to, I need to mentally reset. I need to,
Yeah.
I need to do more, I need to lift a little bit more between so that I've got more stamina. You'd think that at least some sort of tangible thing would have been laid out there, but it really just sounded like he needed to remember how to be a ball player to some degree.
Yeah, it's those things in emotion, in the emotional
Yeah,
states, are always so difficult anyway. And then you're like, well, that make a lot of sense, and that's going to draw more headline to him than anything, which may heck may have been maybe the plan. I
yeah,
mean, you win a lot of people over if you just say, hey, I need to get my crap together. I haven't been worth what they're paying me. Well, you win over a lot of fans when you say stuff like that.
sure.
And it's still, even the fact that he's been so bad outside of the comments he made last night. That's another thing that points. You're just like, he's not been very good. Your cornerstones have
Mhm.
not been very good. Your team leader in home run and Gorman from last year hasn't been great, and you're still where you are. You're just like,
Yeah.
God, that's what tells me you're just like, well, then you've lucked out at this point. But I still think it's a situation you need to fortify it in some way. There's a lot of signs to point that, hey, let's try to re-energize this group for one last push. Um, Hopefully he gathers himself, and that's the deal that needs to be made. I mean, I don't know. I really like Gray.
Mhm.
But it is, yeah, it's one of those that, like last night, you're just like, hey, you're up 6-3, you're locking this thing down. To not do it is tough.
Yeah, yeah, especially like we were talking about how much trouble they've had against lefties to come out and actually score some runs off one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then all
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
You just gotta be better. It's gotta be, and it does feel like we've had that, especially lately. You get a good inning or two out of him, and then all of a sudden it just kind of really just snowballs. It looks like, looking at his game log, he's given up 4 runs or more this year 8 times in his 19 starts, which, I mean, I guess maybe it's not that bad in this day and age, but it feels like, again, the guy that you're paying to be not only a number one, but a guy that should be, yeah, at least in contention for a Cy Young, right? That just feels like a lot of high scoring games. Um, Especially when then there's another game of 3 that's less than 5. I don't, and that was less than 5 innings or 6 innings. Um, I don't know. Maybe I'm nitpicking. I'd have to look at some of the others, but it just feels like him, especially with a stretch, that even if the Cardinals got a lead for him, like we saw last night, it just wasn't safe. And that's what we've got Lance Lynn. That's what we've got Miles Michaelis. That's what those guys are for, to have a lead and it not feel safe. When Sonny Gray's on the mound and you give him a lead, it needs to feel safe, and it doesn't anymore.
Yeah, that was the biggest kick in the gut last night. As you're thinking, oh, this is you can seal this one away really quickly, just to lose one and lose ground, and I don't know. To do it in a season opener is terrible.
Yeah,
Or a
yeah,
series opener.
series
Sorry.
opener. Yeah,
Yeah.
and like you said, coming off of that tough series in Pittsburgh where you only score
Yeah.
3 runs in the whole series, to have the bats come out like that, Mason Wynn hitting a 2-run homer, and then Nolan following up with a 3-run homer, and you just felt like at home that's you're on your way to a good weekend, and for it to end the way it did, it's it's hard. Um, but they shake it off. What they've got Gibson and Michaelis going the next couple of days against the national team that is one of those teams that's already out of it, and the only reason they're not selling much is because they're so young that they don't have a lot to sell, right?
Yeah.
So you're right, you have to win those two. Um, do you think that it feels to me, and maybe that's just because the trading deadline has been moved up a day then from its traditional 31st. This year it's the 30th. It fluctuates these days because why bother keeping anything normal? But it feels to me like some of those trades have started a little earlier than they have in the past. Does that impact Mo at all? Or is it still a situation where he'll make his 1 or 2 deals 5 hours before the trade deadline?
Oh yeah, I would. Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, that's as much as I would love to see something coming this weekend. You play the Saturday evening game tonight, to where you make some kind of move, energizes that crowd a little bit, makes a whole lot of sense. That's not the way he operates.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It would surprise me if they make something before Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, and that's again, especially when you're going after a starting pitcher.
Yeah.
I mean, get an extra start out of a guy could make the difference. Now,
Well, I
yeah,
mean,
go ahead.
no, and you're exactly right. When you bring up pitching, that's like I was surprised that Kikuchi started last night. Because I was thinking that's low hanging fruit from the Blue Jays, that he's going somewhere. To see that he made a start kind of surprised me, and that's you're gonna I would think that in order to do that, if you're gonna try to bolster your rotation, I mean this is gonna sound kind of ridiculous, but I think the minutes are important in
Yeah,
that situation. You know what I mean? And
sure.
to utilize as much as you can on to get something back. And a move over the weekend makes a lot of sense because most of the guys are actually going to start over the weekend. So, maybe not make a whole lot of sense, but it just feels like it would. Yeah, I don't know. We've said this forever, that they're never going to set the market, and they're going to
Mhm.
be as pragmatic as possible, and it will be the last minute, and heck, we may be talking about a midnight trade. One of those situations.
Yeah. Well, the deadline's at 5, so we won't have to worry about that, I guess. But
Yeah,
um, I do remember those days. The
yeah, it
days
was
of
awesome.
midnight on the 31st was great. Because you had all the guys, you had the hug watch, you had everything, all that excitement. Sometimes you woke, if you didn't stay up that late, you woke up the next morning to find out what happened. It just, it loses a little bit. I mean, it's somewhat fun to, if you're on Twitter at, around that time and the deals keep popping off, but it's not quite the same. But yeah, I get it. I mean, a pitcher pitching last night didn't make too much. I mean, because they're going to, anytime a pitcher switches organizations, it always feels like it takes them a little bit longer. They have to kind of get the playbook to some degree. I mean, it's not like
Yeah,
football, but still, they got to get it with their catcher. They got to kind of, and they don't always seem to make the start on their next turn, right? I mean, part of that is because they got to fit into somebody else's schedule and stuff. But it feels like there have been times where a pitcher, and not for St. Louis, but for other teams, the pitcher gets dealt at the deadline, and then they don't start for like 6 or 7 days later, even if they didn't pitch like right before the deadline. So I don't worry about it as much. But you're right. I think these guys that are pitching this weekend, if you can get them before they pitch, probably you're putting them in your rotation a day or two earlier than you would have if they had. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see if some deals get done before somebody pitches this weekend.
Yeah, that's I would love for it to happen. It's just not their MO, and
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting, and you're right. I mean, they're going to start looking at people that are coming back. Tommy Edman hurts his ankle, on rehab, and then he was able to come back. See, it says he played. He DH'd on the 27th. Wait, that's today. I guess he's going to DH today. Um, and it's just return, but it's still, you're still probably what you're looking at another couple weeks, right, before he even comes back, and you still wonder what that's going to be. I'm still really interested to see what Tommy Edman brings this year, because not really playing until August, that's going to be really hard. It feels like, for him to get his timing and get adjusted back to the major leagues. But you're in the middle of a race, so how do you
Yeah,
keep running him out there, to figure it out? I don't know. I mean, I don't know how that works. I mean, I guess it helps that if he plays center field, he's taking over Siani, which Siani's he's done better offensively than I thought, but he's still not necessarily a huge issue, especially against lefties. So maybe that helps, but it feels like it's going to also be very tough to have Siani out of that lineup the way he's played defensively. I mean, he's
oh
definitely
yeah,
going to be in games, after the seventh inning, that are close. So I don't know. I think how they use Tommy Edman and how that works. I think it's gonna be interesting to see.
yeah. It's kind of see where he fits into the puzzle, and who loses a job over it. Because you're right, as many close games as they play, you have to have Siani. Siani's become the regular in the lineup anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it will be interesting to see how it plays. Now, I think they could talk themselves into him being the right-handed bat they wanted to. That's another reason that I think that I'm tempering anything offensively coming back. The I'm not. Does it hurt Gorman a little bit playing time? I don't know. Yeah, the mix has seemed odd from the beginning. Whenever considering he was penciled in to be your everyday center fielder. When we thought he would be back in spring training.
Yeah.
It's going to see how they kind of mix him in.
Yeah. I mean, if you're looking at Tommy Edman to be your right-handed bat, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like there's something wrong with you there. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just not. I mean, yeah, he's better right-handed, but actually he's not. I mean, depending on look at it, he's actually better against lefties, so he's hitting right. Okay, yeah. So, but I still don't know that it's just much more than average. I guess we'll see. And he's 6 for 20 in Springfield in the 6 games he's played. So, maybe it won't take too much. I know we continually, I know I do, a lot of people do, continually underestimate what Tommy Edman's going to do.
Yeah.
I think sometimes the front office overestimates what Tommy Edman is going to do. And I guess it wouldn't stun me if whenever he does get through this rehab and he shows up and he doesn't hit, just like Tommy Edman always hits. I mean, he's going to have big hits and all that. And it really, we keep thinking he's going to need to adjust, and maybe he won't. Maybe he just rolls out of bed and that's just who he is. So I think that's a possibility at least.
Sure. Yeah, it's a weird situation.
Yeah, I mean, for a guy that was that they didn't even mention his surgery, and then he'll be back easily in spring training. For him still to be out to this point, I think that goes to show why you don't have surgeries if you don't have to, right? Because there
Yeah.
are, we always think about, well, why doesn't this pitcher just go ahead and get Tommy John or whatever the case may be? and there's a reason. I mean, there are times where things just don't go the way you expect them to go. Um, but there's also, I guess, an argument to be made that they should have had that surgery. It I'd have to look, but he didn't. He played like until late last season. Um, he could have had that surgery
Yeah.
well before then, right? I mean, he could have had the surgery before the end of the season last year he needed it then. And I don't, again, we don't know, but I think if I remember without looking stuff up that he struggled down the stretch, and there was a good possibility that was why. Um, so maybe they should have backed it up a little bit. But then again, the way this whole thing has gone, I don't know that it would have made any difference.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always wondered on the injury front, you know, eh, any surgery is life changing.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
know that, and it's the last protocol. But before the high performance athletes, you do wonder how quick the call needs to be made on a lot of that stuff, especially if they want it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, they very well may not, and I mean, Tommy Edman hit 277 in September last year, so I'm
Yeah,
guessing that it didn't bother him too much. Um, and he played the whole year. So we'll talk about it in a little bit. I know we were talking about with Brendan Donovan last year, right? He kind of lingered around DHing
oh man,
and
yeah,
before until the trade deadline, and then they went ahead and shut him down. Maybe I was conflating the two. For some reason, I had thought that Edmund had struggled down the stretch last year, but apparently not so much. Um, so maybe there wasn't anything else you could do.
yeah.
Riley O'Brien is pitching in Memphis. I feel like if they were going to make one move, they get that starter. They don't get the reliever because of O'Brien being pretty close, Steven
Yeah.
Matz being a little bit after him, and he's probably going to pitch in the bullpen. Um, I think if you wanted to argue that the bullpen was getting internal upgrades or internal refresh, if you were the front office, I think that's an argument that people would buy.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, um, yeah. No, I agree with you on that one. It, I think that's one of those that I think that if there's any activity at all, I think that it's going to be. I think that it will, for the most part, be a positive. I think everybody's sitting on their laurels right now, thinking that this isn't going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. Um, it's very possible. I'm looking at Steven Matz's update here.
Yeah,
I just I started looking at that. I would be. I know there's expected return of mid August. I'm I bet I would be a little bit surprised if we see him at all this year. Honestly, look, just reading how this has gone and everything, it kind of
crazy.
feels like there's going to be enough setbacks that'll eventually just shut him down and hope he's ready for next year.
Yeah. Yeah, that's tough. I mean that's turned into a kind of a that contract is looking increasingly bad, but worse
Yeah,
by the day.
yeah. Um, and it's not one that the Cardinals can try to move in this offseason unless they just give him away somewhere.
Yeah,
Um, and I mean, with your Gray's coming back next year, of course, and part of we were talking about salary earlier. He does get like a $10 million bump, I think, next year, so because it's so backloaded. So there is that factor when you're talking about things at the trade deadline. Um, but you've got Gray, Michaelis will be in his last year, Matz will be in his last year, and then I mean, I feel like unless something really strange happens, you've almost got to bring Kyle Gibson back, right? I think there's a significant gamble on that. I don't know that he'll pitch as well as he did this year, but I think it's kind of hard not to pick that option up.
yeah.
Um,
No,
so
I
then
agree.
yeah,
I was a little surprised that you said Lynn would not be back.
I if
They're
he
gonna,
was, I wouldn't be terribly shocked if he was, but
yeah.
I think all the signs point to that not happening. But why would you say that he would be back?
Well, to me, I feel like that they have not been. I wouldn't say impressed isn't the word. I don't think anybody's shoving them out the door yet. That's what I think, and I think to me that's the low hanging fruit type signing that they would go out to try to look for anyway. So if you have guys that want to be here, let's just re up it and hope that someone pushes them out of the way. I don't think you can expect hints in the opening day or in the opening day rotation next
Oh
year.
no, not at all.
And it's one of those to where where's Roby going to be? Where's Reverse going to be? It's the Kloppenstein type situations. I just don't think anybody's knocking on the door to move them out. And I don't understand. And I don't see a situation where they're gonna, if they go out and sign somebody, it's going to be a Lance Lynn type. I think if Lynn's not here, Lynn has decided that he's not pitching anymore. That's the feeling that I get.
I mean, that's fair, but I also think that if you run this team back next year with the same pitching rotation, you're going to have the same issues that you've had this year. Plus
But
the
but
fact that,
but
plus,
here's the thing.
well, go
With
ahead.
me, my question to you is that is that with the understanding that they're going to upgrade? Now, see, that makes sense, but I'm not
Yeah,
convinced that would be that would be the angle.
I think that I think that they I think that they would. Now, I don't know how much of an upgrade, but I would think that if there's a free spot in the rotation, now then again, I mean, but then again, do they go out and do they just let Palante take the fifth spot? The way he's pitched, which might not be that much more than Lance Lynn. I don't know. I mean, I can see what your point is, and I that's absolutely fair. Um, and you do wonder if they would get somebody better. And I know Lynn's been skewed a little bit by some bad games. That 10 run game against the Nationals last time out, or a couple times out last time they played the Nationals. But he's had some good ones as of late too. So maybe you do. I just don't know. I just can't imagine them. I can't imagine them picking up both options
Yeah,
and then Michaelis and Matz and an increase in Sonny Gray. You lose Goldschmidt. Um, it becomes hard to see what they do at all this winter. And this team is probably headed for another 500 season, around that next year if they did that. But, you know, replacing Lance Lynn with Andre Palante doesn't change that much. Um, there isn't anybody. I noticed Tink Hens pitches, I think today or sometime soon. But he's pitched 3 innings total in the last 8 weeks. If Hens, I don't think Hens makes it to Memphis this year. I think Hens maybe starts at Memphis next year. But
yeah,
as slow as he's been, there's an argument to be made that he's going to be back at Springfield to start the year next year.
sure,
You
sure,
definitely don't count on Hens. I wonder a little bit about Quinn Matthews. I do wonder if he's like that dark horse for a rotation spot next year. That being said, he's barely been at Springfield, so
yeah,
you hate to put a whole lot on that. If he's at Memphis all year or most of the year next year, that's perfectly fine too, because the kid just got drafted to some degree.
yeah,
Um, I just don't. I just feel like I don't know. I guess maybe we're used to that rotation changing. I think they've had some good luck with Lynn this year. Overall, I mean, he's obviously had some bad starts, but when you look at the 4.17 ERA, the 4.39 FIP, I think they've had a little bit of good luck. I know they've had some good luck with Gibson. You add another year to those guys. You add another year to Michaelis. We talked about it this year. This rotation felt very shaky going into the year. You bring those guys back and add another year to all their ages, and I think it's even more
yeah,
tentative, and I worry about it.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's great points. Great points. I mean, it's one of those to where I think that he's really liked there, and I think that he's like that they've liked what he's brought.
Sure. Yeah.
and I could see very, very easily that that he could be brought back. I mean, it's
Yeah.
now if it goes the other way, it wouldn't surprise me. Honestly, I do wonder if he even pitches next year.
Mm.
But yeah, it would not shock me at all if he was in the rotation for the Cardinals next year.
Yeah, and you're right. I agree with that too. I mean, if he's there, it does feel like if he's pitching next year, it's probably with St. Louis. I think that,
Yeah.
and I think that he's pitched well enough to say that he's still a major league pitcher, right? I mean, he's had his ups and downs. He's definitely cut into that home run, that crazy home run total from last year, right? Um, so yeah, you may be right. I wonder, if you go into next season, how do you feel if this is mainly the team that comes back? Because it's hard to, there's probably not, if there's not a addition to the rotation, there's probably not an addition to the the lineup either, right? Because you're replacing Goldschmidt with the Burleson, or
Yeah.
your hope. We still haven't seen enough out of Walker to know that. I mean, he may be on the major league roster next year, but we can't. I don't think you can say, oh well, then you're going to plug in this superstar. Um, you know what? I mean, what does this team look like if
Mhm.
if coming back in 2025 and it looks very very similar to what this team has looked like?
Yeah. I mean, do you next year? Do you see them going with a Burleson Walker? I would think Burleson plays first, and then Walker in
Yeah.
right field, and then you run with it, and then start figuring out what you've got. Especially because I'm not so certain we see Walker again this year.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair statement. I've looked at his numbers, um, when we were doing Gateway this last week, and he hadn't, and I think he hit one this week, but he had not hit a home run in July at that point in time. Um, you're still not seeing the power that you'd like to for Walker. So yeah, I think it's very legitimate that if we do see Jordan Walker, it's uh one of those two September call ups. He might be that
Yeah.
one September call up, or that may, if they don't trade Ivan Herrera, maybe they use that at the three catcher spot and he still didn't come up. I don't know. But um yeah, I don't think you see him until then, which is, very weird to say, but it's also a situation where I don't know what you count on Jordan Walker for next year either when you're
Sure.
figuring it out. But I do think that it's probably a point where they I don't think they can run him back to Memphis for a third year. So I think he
No,
has
no,
to
no, no.
stick with the
Completely
majors.
agree. Yeah, there's a part of me that maybe the overly optimistic part of me that's like, I'm so glad they're letting him hit down there and figure it out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's also that side where you're thinking, well, he's not figuring it out. We don't know that.
Right.
We really, you know what I mean? The numbers indicate that's not happening. But I mean, I'm skeptical on some of those sometimes. The But I just, when you hear that his name is up, and I would be shocked if they trade somebody his age. Let's put it that way.
Oh yeah, you can't trade Jordan Walker. I mean, in part because you're going to get 40 cents on the dollar for him, to some degree. You're not getting the value that Jordan Walker should have, right? And then he's going to come around and be developed. There's just no way that you could do that. There's not anybody out there that's worth that, and you just can't do that. I think if you were man, I don't know that any organization is that much of a gamble. But if you wanted to sell high on somebody, it'd be like on Burleson, right? I mean, and I'm not suggesting that, I don't want to get that wrong, because I do think the underlying metrics are there. We've talked about it in the past, how this is the kind of the hitter you expect Burleson to be, and that's what you want in your lineup. But I mean, you think back to, a couple of years ago where, if you can you imagine if you had sold a little bit high on Dylan Carlson versus where he is now. Um, again, I'm not advocating it, and I don't think that that's the situation. But if you were looking to try to restock a little bit, that would be an interesting person. But that would take a a front office philosophy shift that is so significant. I don't think we can it doesn't even enter our frame of reference.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's Yeah, no, completely agree. Yeah, I mean, you said it well, and it's just a weird time of the year, and for them to be where they are, just a weird season overall.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's better than last year, obviously.
Yeah.
And especially,
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I mean, we were talking about next year now about what three starters they wanted.
yeah,
You know.
yeah. And then we, given where we were at early part of May, we expected to be talking about that again this year, right? We expected at the beginning of May, the way they were playing, that we would be coming to this point in time and we'd be talking about who's going out. Might be actually talking about a Burleson trade, right? And thinking about the prospects that he could bring back because of what um, and we're not, thankfully. The Cardinals played a lot better. They've gotten themselves into at least playoff positioning. Um, so yeah, I mean, it could be a lot worse, but you're right. It has been an odd season because there have been times where they've wasted starts from a Gibson or a Lynn that they just really shouldn't waste, right? I mean, because if you're getting a good
Yeah.
start out of those guys, you need to win. Or, and I don't want to say they didn't waste the Sonny Gray start. Sonny Gray wasted the start last night.
Yeah.
But you've seen situations like that where you give your ace a lead and he blows it. So um, it's still been, it could have been better. It could have been a lot worse. But we come into the trade deadline and the Cardinals are at least soft buyers. And I mean, that's where you'd rather be than the alternative.
Sure. Sure. I mean, that's it's always one of those. Just selfishly, I never don't want them to ruin my summer, and they definitely
Right.
haven't.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they've won more than they've lost, at least at this point. So we hope that continues. Cardinals do have the Rangers coming back to town this week. It also gives us a chance to try again with the Kerry Buck broadcast, um, which will be fascinating. Maybe the last Cardinal game that Jack Buck called was the Game 7 of the 2011 World Series against these two teams. Um, I don't think I don't know the way the Cardinals have dealt with weather this year. I don't know that I'd say we shouldn't have to worry about rain, but hopefully not. And I'm glad they were able to reschedule it. I think it should be a fun night.
Yeah. No, it's yeah. I like the special stuff like this. Just yeah, and I look forward to it, and yeah, it's just I wish baseball did more of these things, and they probably do, but just in our in our Cardinals bubble, we just don't see it.
Yeah, and I think that baseball lends itself to that. You can do a
Yeah,
game like this because there's 162 of them. I'm sure that football does things like this as well.
yeah,
But it's a little harder to do when you're only got 16, 17 games or whatever it is. Um, to do that. Oh, I forgot about that game. I pulled up the August schedule. Cardinals, of course, they do have the Rangers, and then they go to Wrigley for to start August, first 4 days of August, and that was the last time you see the Cubs. I continue to put my objection to this balanced schedule.
yeah.
Although I did notice that at least next year they end the year at Wrigley Field,
Hey, that's
which
tough.
I mean, not great, but at least if it's Cardinal Cubs last of the season, if there is any kind of playoff contention, that's an interesting series. But the last time the Cubs come to Busch is early August. But anyway, then they've got that game on Monday, a week, week from Monday. That makeup game against the Mets
Yeah,
before the race. I'd forgotten about that
which
they'd
will be
squeeze
big,
that game in. Yeah,
but it could
yeah, it will be.
potentially be big unless you play yourself out of it.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be well past the deadline. You may see some new faces there, and
Hmm.
on both sides, so that should be interesting. But anyway, Rangers and Cubs this week, and that's, I mean, again, Rangers are playing very, very well, and it's the Cubs, and we know, we just had a 5-game series of Cubs or a 4-game series of the Cubs that they split. They got another 4-game one here this time in Wrigley Field, and um, you never know what happens in Wrigley Field. So, um, it is a big week on all the way around for the Cardinals because by the time we record next Saturday, trades have been made, and if they struggle this week, you could be really starting to wonder if they should have made any trades at all.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, It's sadly enough to say, and we may not be surprised that they don't.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, then you start, I don't know. I wonder how much each day's win or loss plays into what Mo is doing. Um, I mean, does a loss like last night make him more hesitant to make a move, or does it make him more, hey, we've got to do something to, save this team? I don't
I,
know.
I don't think he ever acts in the moment.
Well, that's true. I mean, I get that for sure. We know that, right? We've seen. I think the most notable of that is to sign Mike Matheny to an extension the day after the Cubs World Series. He's got his plan. He's going to stick with it. But I do wonder if it just doesn't at least play on the margins, right? He's not going to react to that game, but it's like, okay, well, we've lost this one. Now our percentages are less. Do I, make the move to to get us pushed over, or is this a situation where we don't want to give up that capital because this team looks worse? I don't know. I mean, I think it has to at least somewhat play into his decisions, even if he's not a direct reaction to, oh, we lost, let me hit that trade button.
Yeah, that's yeah. No, I agree. I'm not sure the game lends itself to that, and I just don't feel like there's much knee jerk reaction at all.
Yeah, I get that, but when they're balanced so finely on this idea that they could go either way, I do just wonder. And again, you're right, it's probably not a very important thing. I mean, he's probably got they're making their talks, and if they can make a deal, they will. But they're also probably not going to make it till the very end. And
Yeah,
I don't know. Hopefully that other teams don't come in and outbid them while they're waiting around. We will see.
yeah.
All right. Well, Alan, I'll be with you again next week. We'll have a whole lot of talk about whatever the Cardinals have done. But until then, for Alan, I'm Daniel. Good night.
Good night.
Hey everyone, Daniel here. Appreciate you listening to the show, and if you are a regular listener, great to have you. If you're a first timer, hope you come back. We would love it if you would rate and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. Either click some stars or give us a write-up. That would be awesome. It helps to get the show spread a little bit farther, and heck, we just like the feedback. I'm going to be honest with you. So if you haven't done that, please do give it a shot. You can find us anywhere you find podcasts for the most part. We're also on YouTube. If you're interested in putting this on in the background, there's no video with it yet. Hopefully never will be. I don't think you want that, but who knows? You can find us, search for Meet Me at Musial, or you can look for Daniel Shoptaw. It's under my personal account. But the shows upload there, so if you want to listen to it there, you can. Contact Alan or Daniel or me. That's me, Daniel. You can contact us at any time at C70 at amedlock1. You can follow the Twitter account of the Musial at Meet Me at Musial. And thanks for being a listener. Appreciate it, and talk at you later.
Is there any point where that...
Well, I think right now I can tell you that we're going to trade people. I just don't know if it's going to be like household names or more of guys that just aren't likely going to be here next year.